Hey, what's good, YouTube? This is Who Is Like God, and welcome back to the final prophecy we're going to study in the Messiah 2024 series, which is Micah 5:2. Now, I'm very excited because by the time this goes on my channel, I've uploaded a video about how the New Testament uses prophecy as a kind of motif, saying how in Jesus' life there are many parallels with the history of Israel, and what they're trying to do is point that out. But here is an example of something that's just direct, literal, point A to point B that we can actually find. This pertains to the birthplace of the Messiah, which makes sense that he would hail from the city of David. So as the prophet goes in Micah 5, chapter verse 2, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who you are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days." And then it goes on to continue about him and his kingdom and everything like that. Now, one thing that's an aside, I think there's, especially in light of some of the other stuff that we could take from this, is the divinity or the pre-existence, the preeminence of the Messiah at the very least. When we take this in light of Numbers 24:17 and look at the macro of what the Hebrew scriptures are predicting in Israel's king. But the specific thing I want to talk is that the ruler who's coming forth is from of old. So this isn't just any mere human, any mere Israelite. This is the king. He's to be from Bethlehem Ephratah, if I'm saying that right, if I ain't butchering it, i.e. the king to come who's going to restore Israel is going to come from Bethlehem. Now let me record the fulfillment as recorded in the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 2. In those days, the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all of the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. So the prophecy is pretty interesting in the fact that Caesar Augustus had made a decree for, I believe it's a tax registration. I believe it's a tax registration type of thing, or a census, or something to that effect. I'm going to bring up some scholars in a second, but it's because of that Jesus was in Bethlehem, and that's when Miriam had given birth, was in that window, because Jesus, we know, in terms of his hometown, was from Nazareth and things like that. But it's the way that this worked out, that because of the decree of the empire at that time, and he gives specific dating to when this would happen, Caesar Augustus and Quirinius, governor of Syria, we have a specific time frame of the historical situation, which is why Jesus was in Bethlehem as the first place. So it's interesting to see the fulfillment that the Messiah would be from Bethlehem. He would be born there, but his ministry would be much, much greater. Here's the point I want to emphasize, is when we can look at Jesus, if Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, you could argue that we could disqualify him as the Messiah, or at least it would lose a lot of credibility to him being the Messiah. But the fact that this Israelite from the tribe of Judah, who hails from Bethlehem, would have this identity and do all these things in Israel as well as the world, that is something that needs to be looked into, because now he's fulfilling all of these prophecies and all of these motifs from a non-presuppositional perspective, looking at his ministry and what is reported from the New Testament and the world at large. So now it becomes the odds that Christ beat when you look at parameters that he had to fall into, and the great effect he had from the offshoot from falling within those parameters. You see what I'm saying? Imagine one Israelite, imagine one Judahite doing all this stuff in his lifetime and in the world while being born in Bethlehem, which the Messiah has to be born in, while claiming to be the Messiah. The odds just skyrocket in terms of how high the odds are that Jesus beat by doing all of these things within specific parameters, not only in terms of where he would be born, but the timeline of when he would be born. Just think about how high odds are that Israel, a given Israelite from the tribe of Judah, would come from Bethlehem, would have this identity as the Messiah, would have the identity as this divine Messiah, in line with what the full nature of what the Torah predicts, believe they are this figure, come from this specific location, have this lineage, and then do all the stuff that Jesus did. When you start honestly thinking about these things, the logical conclusion is that Jesus is who he said he was, or evidence pointing into that direction, to the point where I believe it becomes concrete. But here's what I want to go, because When you put everything on the table, the logical conclusion of all of this becomes very clear, extremely clear, when you actually begin to look at the odds that Jesus beat and the amazing effect he had on the children of Israel and the world when we begin to study it. The logical thing to say is that the New Testament is fabricating it. The logical objection, the New Testament is fabricating this so that Jesus could fulfill the prophecy. Well, here's the problem with that. When we actually look, the New Testament is a pretty reliable source, even if we don't presuppose inerrancy. When we get into the dialogue between believing scholars and critical scholars about this, even if we don't presuppose inerrancy, even if we don't presuppose that there are no errors in the Bible or in the New Testament, which I fundamentally do believe, but that comes more from a faith position after the fact. Even if we don't presuppose it going in and just say these are Israelites that believe something happened, believe that the Messiah came, this is what they wrote down. If we go from that perspective and get into the dialogue among scholars about this and understand the streams of evidence that they agree on between believing scholars and critical scholars, from that perspective, we can see that these guys are reliable, historically reliable in terms of knowing the place and the details and the acquaintances who are intimately connected to this movement. And beyond that, we know that they legitimately believe the things they were proclaiming as pertains to the resurrection. We could look at people like Craig Evans and I forgot his first name. I think Craig Evans, Craig Bloomberg, who are believing scholars, as well as even Dr. By Ehrman, some of the things he concedes with regards to the New Testament, and going from that perspective, even in terms of critical scholarship. Especially Luke. Luke and Acts is probably some of the most historically reliable stuff in the New Testament, even compared to other books, just with how many details they get right while other people get wrong. Things that you wouldn't know unless you were actually there. So that's just, Luke especially. The fact that this is in Luke corroborates the truth of it because of how meticulous Luke was as a historian. But here's the point I want to make with regards to the census, because people say, it doesn't seem like the census happened, or the dating that Luke gives doesn't match. Well, here's a page I wanted to read from The Case for Christ. This is page 101 of A Case for Christ. The birth narratives of Jesus claim that Mary and Joseph were required by a census to return to Joseph's hometown of Bethlehem. Let me be blunt. This seems absurd on the face of it, I said. How could the government possibly force all its citizens to return to their birthplace? Is there any archaeological evidence whatsoever that this kind of census ever took place? McRae calmly pulled out a copy of his book. Talking to a scholar named McRae. Actually, the discovery of ancient census forms has shed quite a bit of light on this practice, he said as he leafed through the pages. Finding the reference he was searching for, he quoted from an official government order dated AD 104. So here we have a census post-Christ, and this is what it says. Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt, seeing that the time has come for the house-to-house census, it is necessary to compel all those who for any cause whatsoever are residing out of their provinces to return to their own homes, that they may both carry out the regular order of the census and may also attend diligently to the cultivation of their allotments. Basically, what this means is, looking at a census of the Roman government post-Christ, we have this practice that's established in history that what Luke is getting at, we have other sources corroborating in terms of a census that required you to go back to your homeland, go back to where you're originally from. So back to the specific issue with the dating of Luke. This, however, did not entirely dispose of the issue. Luke said the census that had brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem was conducted when Quirinius was governing Syria and during the reign of Herod the Great. That poses a significant problem, I pointed out, because Herod died in 4 BC, which is true, and Quirinius didn't begin ruling Syria until 86, conducting the census soon after that. There's a big gap there. How can you deal with such a major discrepancy in the dates? So peak the scholarly discussion about this. McRae knew I was raising an issue that archaeologists have wrestled with for years. He responded by saying, an eminent archaeologist named Jerry Verdeman has done a great deal of work in this regard. He found a coin with the name of Quirinius on it in very small writing, or what we call micrographic letters. This places him as proconsul of Syria and Sicilia from 11 BC until after the death of Herod. I was confused. What does that mean, I asked. It means that there were apparently 2 Quiriniuses, he replied. It's not uncommon to have lots of people with the same Roman name, so there's no reason to doubt that there were 2 people by the name of Quirinius. The census would have taken place under the reign of the earlier Quirinius. Given the cycle of a census every 14 years, this would work out quite well. And another understanding from Sir William Ramsay, the late archaeologist and professor at both Oxford and Cambridge universities in England, had come up with a similar theory. He concluded from various inscriptions that while there was only one Cornelius, he ruled on Syria on 2 separate occasions, which would cover the time period of the earlier census. Other scholars have pointed out that Luke's text can be translated as the census took place before Cornelius was governing Syria, which would also resolve the problem. Now you could look into the book yourself. I recommend The Case for Christ, although I do have some disagreements with it, mainly when it comes to the theology of ancient Judaism, that they miss a lot of things that scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser and Alan Segal and Daniel Boyarin and a bunch of guys get into. So it's not, the book isn't without its blind spots, but if you want to have an honest intellectual discussion between scholars about the New Testament beliefs and the vindication of these things from a historical perspective, I do recommend it in general. What this shows is that from the perspective of the streams of evidence and the dialogue among scholars, we have a few different theories. You know what I'm saying? For one, we have a possibility based on coins we found that there were 2 Corneliuses, and the dating of the one pertaining to the coins goes into Luke's time frame, meaning as it is, Luke's directly correct, and there would have been a census during the time of Cornelius and Herod and the time of when these things would happen. It's possible one Cornelius had 2 terms, which is what the Cambridge guy suggested, and people say grammatically it can be translated as before Cornelius, which means Luke was thinking about the late Cornelius, or the guy that came after the time of Herod, and he's saying before then is when this census happened. Either way, when we bring in the grammatical element as well as recent archaeology, when we have a nuanced discussion based on the streams of evidence and interpreting them, we can see that these things are reconcilable with a historian who we know is meticulous in history, even if we don't presuppose that he was inerrant, and even if we say it's possible for him to have errors, or even that he did have errors in some places. We see that as a historian, Luke acts is, you know what I'm saying, that he is caring about that. He's caring about preserving message, carrying history, making sure correct doctrine is produced, and just a lot of little historical details that pertain to what he's talking about that you wouldn't really know unless you were part of that in an environment and things like that. So from a nuanced discussion from all of those points, we can see the reliability of this tradition of the census, even if we don't presuppose that Luke is perfect as a historian from going in. So all that being said, when we look at what the prophets wrote, and we have a nuanced discussion and look at the scholarship pertaining to the New Testament, we can see that what was spoken by the Israelite prophet was fulfilled due to the time of the Israelite exile and oppression under the Romans, and what had caused Jesus' family to go back to Bethlehem so that the Messiah could really come from Bethlehem. And from that perspective, we have someone who was born in Bethlehem have this ministry, and we can appreciate everything else Jesus did against the motifs and prophecies of the Hebrew Bible, which is all of the prophecies before this point in the playlist, and we can have a mindset to look at all of those and appreciate all of those from someone who claimed to be the Messiah who was honestly born in Bethlehem. We have to take Jesus a lot more seriously if you're a non-believer, as someone who did all of these things, coming all of these things while being born where the scripture says the Messiah had to be born, and coming in the window the Messiah says the Messiah had to come to. We can look at all those things within the original context of the scriptures and understand things fulfilled out in Israelite history that serve as closed windows from the perspective of the original scriptures that give us a window of when the Messiah had to come before. We could look at all of those things and see how the odds become that someone within all those parameters would do the things he did and transform the way he did as an Israelite. So from a very Hebraic root, I'm very zealous to proclaim how Jesus, Yeshua, is vindicated as the Messiah. That being said, y'all be blessed. The Messiah 2024 playlist is not done. What we're actually going to do now is compare other people from the children of Israel who claim to be the Messiah, who are not, who failed. And we're going to see, just comparing other people who came to the Messiah, how Jesus had these qualifications and the fact that is replicated among no other Israelite and no other Jewish person a little more broadly at all. So all praise to the Most High through the Son, his one only begotten Son, his one only Son. And I'll see you all in the next video, all right? Peace and blessings.